Tēnā rā tātou, Māori ora ki te whare, ki te kāhui, kua whakarite tēnei hui, ka mihira watu. Ki ngā mainga whakahi, kua hara mai nei, kia whakanuia te mana wahine, ka mihira watu. Ki tō tātou tauira, tāhua, ka mihi anō. Ko waia, he uri o tahu pōtiki, ko Kāti Hoerapa me Kāti Hateatea ka hapu, ko Sacha McMeeking tōku ingoa, nā reira tēnā rā o koutou. It is beautiful to be with you on a lovely summer's evening. Thank you to the Commission for convening this event. It's our honour to have you in our whare. And for me personally, this is a really important and meaningful opportunity, because when I reflected on the nature of Māori women's leadership in the context of the rights of Indigenous peoples as protected under the Declaration, I realised that the first thing I did as an attempting to be grown up in a professional capacity was to write an intervention for the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which paid homage to Whaiatariana Turia. So she is one of the heroes who sits deepest in my heart, and when I am doubting what I am doing, thinking what would Whaiatari think, keeps me honest and true. And so the opportunity to be at an event which brings me full circle back to where I began is really powerful. So thank you for creating this opportunity. And what I'd like to talk about tonight is the nature of leadership in Indigenous contexts, how that relates to the recognition of Indigenous rights, and what that means today for the place of Māori women. So we're used to leadership because there is currently a cult of leadership obsession in the world, as we know. If you Google leadership, what happens is you get a raft of advertorials trying to convince you to do a leadership program. That's how obsessed we are with leadership. And in that context, we see lots of different types of leadership, which ultimately come down to, I think, a lot of hero worship. And I think the nature of leadership that we're seeing in the Western world has never applied to Te Ao Māori and never will. So we see different leadership styles, whether it's the authoritative style who commands that action must happen, or the transactional style of leadership which gives you a whole fabulous set of tasks on your to-do list, very tidy, not particularly emotionally resonant. There's increasing work on facilitative leadership where you bring people along with you and the like. That is really singular leadership. And that notion of singular leadership I don't think has ever operated within Te Ao Māori. What we have always had is a distributed network of leaders who worked collaboratively. And I think that's often not seen because we're so used to celebrating our great taniwha like Todd Tiffany or Tā Mark. We're used to seeing these figureheads at the front. But the reality is that there is a distributed network that enables a whole community of leaders to emerge and to drive together. And as I'm sure will be talked about tonight, the whole meaning of rangatira is about the ability to weave people together. And through our distributed network of leadership, if we look to the time of the settlement, while Todd Tiffany was the fiercest advocate in all of his brilliant and slightly maverick ways, he had a team of other mavericks who were helping him, whether it was Uncle Trevor, who was working out how to finance the settlement, or Matua David Higgins, who was doing his work with the fisheries settlement, or Auntie Janie, who was there as part of the decisions. Tā Tiffany is remarkable and he deserves every accolade he has received. And equally, he was part of a team of leaders that worked together. And inside that team of leaders were some remarkable Māori Ngāi women who were doing things that the storybooks have not yet celebrated in due course, I think. Because the most important part about leadership within the Māori community is the ability to build a community of support behind any direction. The vision, the action, it only has meaning if there are people there. And in creating that community of support, our women have always had a critical role. And I'll come back to the place of women and where I think we could be heading after talking a little bit about how those styles of leadership have related to our journey in rights recognition. So if we look at New Zealand's history, we know the short version. Once upon a time, Māori were fully in control. Then there was a treaty that said something, and then there was this period of forgetting that the treaty existed and Māori rights being eclipsed. We know that story. But happily, we've got the second part to that story of periods of rights being recognised within New Zealand and globally. And those rights have been recognised in periods. It wasn't all at once. So first we had rights of recognition to notions of partnership. Then we had rights that were recognised about land. Then we had rights that were recognised about collective identity. And the Declaration, I think, is the quintessential part of that rights recognition journey. And through those rights recognition, we had powerful, grand debates as a nation about what we believed or were willing to agree to as a nation about the rights that we would recognise for iwi Māori. And I don't believe that rights recognition journey has finished. There's still a work in progress to get to tō tātou tino rangatiratanga. Thankfully, that job is on my tuakana Arihia's shoulders, and I wish you strength with that mission. I have faith too. So we're still on a journey, but when it's been about the grand debates, should Māori be recognised? Should there be a right for such a thing? It's been critical to have people like Todd Tiffany at the helm, the fierce advocate that could drink whiskey with ministers and convince them, the orator who could debate on television and in the media and convince people through the power of his wit. That is absolutely critical. What we saw with Ngāi Tahu, with the transition from Todd Tiffany as that fiercest of advocates to Tā Mark, it does seem that if you hold a leadership position for a long time, you'll get knighted. What we've seen is a move to peace building and bridge building, which I think is natural. Once the settlement had been achieved and the core substance of Ngāi Tahu rights had been recognised in a settlement, it's a time for a different type of person at the helm, with peacemaking and bridge building being the next step. And that's critically important. What I think is more important to recognise, though, is that the fundamental nature of our leadership has not changed through the various periods of our rights being recognised. No matter what the nature of the fight, we've always had a distributed, team-based leadership style where everyone has a place, everyone has a responsibility and a contribution to make. What we've seen is that the person at the helm is the tactician of the day. So in the period where it was about grand debate, the tactician that we needed was the orator and advocate. At the time where we needed this space to implement the rights that were transferred from the settlement, we needed someone who would create a space to implement and vision and create in our own image. So we needed a peacemaker to clear that space. And I think as we look at what we need now, there is an ever critical role for Māori women who are remarkably stepping into leadership roles, whether it's our very own CEO, Arihia, whether it's the Deputy Kaiwhakahaere, Lisa Tūmahai, whether we look at the recent appointment to Te Mātawai, our new real entity, we have Māori women in really powerful, important leadership roles, and that's important. And I think we will continue to see that, because increasingly I think what this phase of Māori development, Māori pursuit of tō tātou tino rangatiratanga looks like, is about creative solution building. And I think that's where our women have always been powerful. We make things happen. Have you ever seen the cook that's run out of an ingredient in a marae kitchen? She still comes up with something amazing. Our women have always had a creative place to be in building the future. That said, it doesn't mean that everything is going to be easy. I had a conversation with my taua, my grandmother, a week ago about whether Ngāi Tahu could embrace a woman as kaiwhakahaere. As many of you will know, we're in that time of finding a successor and defining our leadership needs for the next tranche of our journey. And my taua, who is feisty and powerful, and the thing that she commends most is people having fire in their belly, still does not believe that Ngāi Tahu is ready for a woman as kaiwhakahaere, which I find fascinating and puzzling at the same time, because she has always been someone that has driven our world down home. She expects all of the women, we're really good at making girl babies, in our family to be powerful and stand in their own skin. But the place and the way that we do that will continue to evolve, I think. Having said that, what has my contribution been in this space? So the first is that the language of leadership makes me feel deeply uncomfortable. And I think that I am not alone in that, because when we talk about the nature of leadership, team-based collaborative leadership, the other thing that is constant in our notion of leadership is about service and contribution to kaupapa. I don't know any Māori leaders that I love and respect who are in it for the knighting or the job description. They're in it for the kaupapa, and that's why we trust them. If we live in a community that is about team-based leadership, with everyone pulling together on a common vision, the only thing that will guarantee that that occurs is a shared commitment to the same kaupapa. And with that, I think, comes the greatest distinction between Western leadership and Indigenous leadership. Western leadership has been about hero leadership, the hero at the front, the charismatic personality cult-based leader, whereas within Te Ao Māori, what we have is servant leadership. The person who attracts support is the person to whom we have complete faith in the integrity of their commitment to kaupapa. So for me, I've never pursued a role because of what the job title was. I've pursued it because of what I believed I could contribute in that role. And I had the remarkable opportunity, I think, to move through 3 different realities in that way. So the first was as an upstart. The opportunity to be part of the United Nations proceedings on the foreshore and seabed. That was because I was a provocateur who said, well, why don't we go to the UN? And some really powerful people said, okay. And then I fell over, and then we worked out what to do over a number of years. But in doing that and being a provocateur, those were recycling the deeds of people who had come before me. I was not the first Ngāi Tahu woman to participate in UN things. Iri Hapati was there before me, there were many others. It's about pulling through the deeds that have been done before to contribute to the kaupapa of the day, at that time as an upstart. Then the second opportunity that I had was to be, as was said, in the strategy and influence team, which is not a very subtle job title. You can kind of hear me coming, I'm here to influence you. And in that role, what I believed the kaupapa was continuing the journey of the Ngāi Tahu settlement. The Ngāi Tahu settlement was the most remarkable contemporary point of transition for the iwi. But just because the Crown says that treaty settlements are final does not mean we believe that. So I saw my job as being to invent second generation mechanisms that complemented the settlement, and that team still has that responsibility, in my opinion. And I think in that space, and this was not achieved during my time, but I'm confident that it will be, I think we saw one of the consequences of there being space for more women in our settlement team. So what the Ngāi Tahu settlement very much focuses on is mahinga kai and whenua, which is critically important and absolutely right. What the Ngāi Tahu settlement does not have are mechanisms about our people. So the settlement doesn't have mechanisms that address social disparities. It doesn't have mechanisms that are about the relationship between our people and institutions of the state that work with those issues of equity. And I question whether if there had been more women involved in our settlement journey, whether our settlement would have been mahinga kai, plus he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And the third role that I'm in now very much continues that train of thought. So I had absolutely no intention of ever returning to academia, so much so that I threw away all of my lecture notes from my previous incarnation 3 months before applying for this job. You can see how well planning goes in my life. And so I didn't come into the head of school role in Aotearoa because I had any desire to be a proper grown-up academic or because I wanted to run an academic department. I came here because it is a place that is about growing our people. And I think my journey and the evolution that has gone through my journey, I think represents something that is consistent across Māori women's leadership. That the means might change, but the kaupapa never does. So whether I was being an upstart or trying to invent second generation settlement mechanisms or here trying to look after the next generation, it's always been about mō tātou a mō kauri a muriaki nei. The kaupapa change, the tools change, the tactics of the time change, but the reason why never does. Kia ora tātou.